Thank you so much. We will now start with a short video, if I could request the team.
Good morning. A very warm good morning to everyone who joined us for this morning breakfast session. My name is Subin Adhikari, and I work for the Leprosy Mission in Nepal. The Leprosy Mission is an NGO that works to eliminate the causes and consequences of leprosy. Through the Leprosy Mission Nepal, I also chair the Communications Working Group of the Neglected Tropical Diseases NGO Network. The NNN is a global forum of NTD NGOs who are working together to eliminate NTDs. The video that you just saw, which was developed by our colleagues at Africa No Filter, who couldn't be here with us, calls for two very important things. Tell better stories and tell stories better. Storytelling is a powerful medium that's been passed down since the beginning of time. Stories can unite us, but they can also create division, reinforce harmful stereotypes, and fuel misconceptions. And as NGOs and communities of practice, journalists, and stakeholders within the global health and African health sphere, we depend on stories. Stories are how we communicate the inspiration and impact that drives our shared work. That is why how we tell our stories is crucial, and ensuring that stories are gathered and shared ethical is our collective responsibility. But what happens if we don't? Well, we'll lose, and we'll lose quite a lot. But before I go a bit more into detail regarding that, it is my immense pleasure to invite someone who I personally admire and had a chance to learn a lot from, Ms. Ariel Delegi. Ariel is one of the past chairs of the NTD NGO network and is the current policy, advocacy, and resource mobilization lead for NTDs at the Gates Foundation. Over to you, Ariel.
Good morning. It's day 3. I was feeling the energy. I was coming down. I was like, okay, we can do this. We can do this today. Well, as Subin said, my name is Ariel Delegi, and I lead the NTD policy, advocacy, and resource mobilization at the Gates Foundation. And this session comes at a very, very interesting time, a time where global financing and global health in general is at risk. And it's also particularly interesting because we're here. We're here at a conference that speaks to connecting us for change, and that speaks to how we can leverage the power of innovation, the power of the continent to be able to improve the health agenda. But we talk of financing, we talk of innovation, we talk of political will, we talk of community engagement, but we don't talk enough about ethical storytelling. And this is why this session is particularly powerful. You see, in many of the work that we do, in many of the communities that we engage, we empower them by how the words that we use to represent them. Even today, when I read on the screen, a fresh steak, I asked myself, a fresh steak according to whom, right? Because the communities that we serve, the communities that we represent, I don't think they have ever represented themselves in the ways in which global health qualifies them in our reports, in our journalistic reviews. So it really is a message for us. It is not a message for the community. It is a message for us, the practitioners, for us, the community, those that engage the communities, for us, the NGOs, and it's for us, the donors and the governments, to be able to shift this narrative. One of the core tenets, specifically for NTDs, is the WHO roadmap. This WHO roadmap has been an instrumental framework to speak to the next stage, the next wave of engagement in NTDs. And as part of that, it speaks to country ownership. Country ownership, which is a key pillar in terms of paradigm shift. Part of country ownership is also how we tell the stories, how we tell the narrative, and how those that are part of those communities can see themselves reflected in those narratives. So as part of this, I just welcome you to this session, and I really invite you to see yourself today reflected within the conversations that will be ongoing. The conversation that will center government, media, the private sector, as well as the practitioner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Before I hand it over to Ariel, we're talking about how much could we lose by telling the stories that we are doing at the moment. And I'm once again going to take support from our colleagues at Africa No Filter to put up another video that actually breaks down how much these narratives are costing us. Thank you.
They are consulting insights from based in South Africa, and we said, what methodology can we put together? How can we? When someone tells you malaria is costing Africa $1 trillion a year, you sit up because you're like, I thought it was only my ego that was being bruised, but now there is money to it. What we did was partner with the Africa Praxis. They are consulting insights from based in South Africa, and we said, what methodology can we put together? How can we find out in figures, in real money, how much it's costing Africa to have narratives continue the way they are? $4.2 billion from 54 African countries. That number signifies how much extra African countries are paying to access debt financing. So simply put, an African country goes to the World Bank to say, lend me 1,000 Kenyan shillings. And the World Bank says, great, but when you pay me back, I want 20%. A non-African country goes to do the same, and they're told, you know what, bring 12. And there are several factors that contribute to that difference. The defaults on loans. So if a country has a history of defaulting on loans, they are likely to get charged more interest. But now we compare the risk factors of African countries and non-African countries, even when the risk factors are similar. If you take Kenya and Malaysia, same risk factors, same ecosystem, so to say, but still a drastic difference. What was the difference? We looked at how the media talked about them during their election periods. So Kenya, for example, would normally have corruption, violence, ballot theft, things like that in the headlines. Whereas Malaysia, a country with similar climate, similar things happening around its election period, similar indices according to like the democracy index, the electoral indices, the media are not talking about it as much. And so we saw a correlation. Those media reportage contribute up to 10% of the decision making around how much interest people get. So that was the formula. If the way media talks about a country has a 10% correlation to how much they pay at the World Bank. If the media were doing better, and this is not to castigate the media, we've had conversations around it's everyone's problem, right? But if there was a difference in the way stories were being told, and we accounted for that 10% that we're losing, depending on everyone's borrowing, all 54 countries, it came to $4.2 billion. Now that's only interest. There's tourism. We're not looking at how much we're losing, because anytime someone thinks Africa, they say, oh, I saw them in the news. They have droughts. There's nothing there. They don't have water. We've lost money. We're talking brain drain. I don't know if you know, there's the Japa movement in my country right now. Doctors are leaving. Engineers are leaving. Lawyers are leaving. We've not costed that. But that figure was literally a conversation starter to say, guys, $4.2 billion is what it's costing just interest. Are we going to wake up and do better? Or do we want to find out how much more we could potentially be losing in other areas?
$4.2 billion. That is what we are losing as a continent when we keep sharing the stories that we're sharing in the same way. Now, but this is not just Africa's problem. I come from Nepal, a country in South Asia, and narratives that twist and contort the reality of what South Asia is rampant. The harm done by the stories we share become very, very real when I meet a young boy affected by leprosy in Nepal who says he doesn't want to talk about it with his friends because when his friends find out, they discriminate. Why? Because the stories he's heard tell them that they do so. Or a young father in Nepal who wants to get his daughter married as soon as possible because he knows from the stories that he's heard that getting an education in Nepal is less worth than getting married to someone abroad. And I'm sure a lot of us, irrespective of where we come from or what we represent, have heard or seen similar stories. And these stories are costing us. So let's try and change them. Let's start here. Let's start with Africa, and let's start with AHAIC. In the next hour, we'll hear from panelists on why it is important to tell stories ethically, and also how we can take ownership of the situation. My sincere thanks goes out to our partners at the AND Fund, Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative, DNDi, Unlimit Health, and of course, Amref Health Africa for having us here. We'll also showcase a film from our partners over at the AND Fund, which sort of talks about what ethical storytelling can look like in practice. The way we talk about the development sector at large, the way we discuss and write about aid, and the stories we tell to share about the impact of our work that we do across the globe. Words like neglected, vulnerable, and marginalized communities are prevalent across the sector, and most of us will have seen the all too familiar image of a young African child with a seemingly full stomach and flies on their face. And it is uncomfortable, and it's supposed to be uncomfortable. When we define our communities as vulnerable, or use the word vulnerable communities, we create a sense of thinking that it is our communities who are the problem. But in reality, it's not. It's the situations that make them vulnerable. So when you co-create solutions with communities, we tackle those situations. Willingly or unwillingly, we become the stories we hear, tell, and share. But in many ways, and for so many different reasons, our experiences don't essentially match the stories we're sharing. And that creates a dissonance in our heads. So, it is now my immense pleasure to invite the panelists for this session. Nuits Balnéaires, a visual artist who has worked with Unlimit Health on female genital somiasis and who is tackling FGS through art. Please, Nuits, if you could come onto the stage. Kanyang'areng, a nurse and a community health worker who has also shared his experience of living with leishmaniasis and is now works as a nurse. Ysuf Ahmed, who brings an NGO and a filmmaker's perspective to the panel, and Ms. Margaret Muigai Edwin, Director of Communication and Public Information at the Africa CDC. Thank you so much. Hello. Am I audible? Cool. To start off, if I could really request the panel to introduce themselves and also tell us a bit more about what the ethics of storytelling means to them. Nuits, I'm going to start over from you, and if you could just keep on, if you could introduce yourself, please. Thank you.
Very much, Subin. For me, ethical storytelling is really about portraying the people and the community in a way that we can empower them and also restore the image they have of themselves, but also the image that the rest of the world can have of them. Today, that dimension of restoring, I think, is very key in the way we portray the people who has been for a very long time portrayed in the worst way.
Thank you so much. Luke? Luke, if I could come over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Luke Kanyang'areng, as you have been told. I'm a nurse. I come from Kenya, and I work in a facility called Kanyarkwat. I think on my side, storytelling, I think saying ethical storytelling is the way you portray a picture of someone, or you tell a story about someone or a subject without spoiling the image of the person, without offending the person in one way or another, on the way you portray the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very crucial, isn't it? Ysuf, if I can.
Good morning, everyone. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, say it back. Good morning. All right, now you guys are awake. I know it's 8 a.m., so we got to ramp up the energy so we can ramp up and share ideas that will stick with all of us after today. My name is Ysuf Ahmed. I am originally from Ethiopia, but based in New York. I am a filmmaker and photographer and a communication strategist at the End Fund. Ethical storytelling, in one word, is agency, and I'm really looking forward to defining what that is.
Thank you so much. Margaret?
Good morning, everybody. I'm a storyteller first before all the other titles. I'm happy to be here to share Africa CDC's story. So for us, covering 55 member states, I would also say storytelling is more, ethical storytelling is more about creating agency for the communities that we serve. So how do we create that kind of ownership with our communities when we tell our stories? How do our health interventions impact our communities? And in that sense, how do we then ensure that, we are telling the right stories and we are actually creating that agency within the communities that we serve? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Agency had jumped out from the panel, I think, representation, ownership, those are all really great words. If I can come to you first, Ysuf, in your experience as a creative and a photographer, a filmmaker, and, often evidenced through the influence on work, how can we use ethical and inclusive storytelling to help dismantle the narrative around stigma and neglect? How can we work towards that?
I think the reality is that we're working on a group of diseases that impact people that are pushed from national and international systems, And that means that the stories that we tell have to be clear, have to be respectable, and I think saying that ethical is needed is an understatement. When thinking about NTDs, we need to change the narrative from being a discussion around a clinical and pathological disease to an issue of social justice, to an issue of inequity. I think when we're thinking about a clinical lens, we have to understand why we need that. I think some of my, working in comms, some of my coworkers generally ask, but people need to see what these diseases look like. I think it's important. And so I think when people say that, we need to ask why. Like, is this a photo that someone needs in a textbook? Is that what the purpose is? Why does this donor or why does this government worker need this photo? Have they never seen leishmaniasis? Have they never seen LF? Like, what is the issue at hand right now? And I think when we do that, we can share the image, but in a way that's respectful, that prioritizes the person's privacy, And so when sharing clinical photos, it's a focus on what the impact of LF looks like on a leg. That's it. We don't need to include a person's face. I think what makes me think when I capture stories generally is, if I was the one living in this condition, do I want to be the face of LF? Do I want to be the face of trachoma? When you're including your identity in it, it takes that agency away, because organizations will use that as collateral, and if you come across it, you're looking at something that your community has stigmatized you for, that holds so much social weight, and that other people who are impacted will see it, and there's a process of destigmatization that will happen, but that weight is heavy on an individual person. But coming to it from a place of social justice allows people to feel empowered to share that story, to say yes, this issue does affect me, and this is who I am. And this story, one story that I think about is in Kenya with Michael, who's here. Shout out to Michael. It's a story we did with our partner Amref in Mombasa with a woman named Eunice who has LF. And we worked with an incredible photographer, Sarah Waiswa, who's Ugandan but based in Nairobi. And I think her approach was, this is a story that needs time. We can't just come in, take photos, interview the person for an hour and leave. And she spent, a period of 2 to 3 days with Eunice, getting to know her, interviewing her, getting to meet her children, meeting her community. And once Eunice, felt that comfort and opened up, she was able to take out the camera and photographed Eunice in the most respectful, dignifying way, in intimate spaces like her home, in her bedroom, in a clinical space where, she initially went to the hospital thinking that her LF was a cancer diagnosis. And so that was a process of her getting to understand an issue that so many people might misdiagnose as well. But I think this is to say that when we tell stories with respect to the person we're working with, because we are working with them, they're helping us move a message further, we're able to understand the complexity of their lives. We're able to understand that this person is not the issue they're dealing with. I think for Eunice, she was an entrepreneur. She traveled across Kenya. She traveled across the country selling goods, connecting with people, is just jubilant and has an infectious energy. And when we just include their name, age, and the issue they're dealing with, we're robbing her of her dignity and of her agency as a person. And we're not really contributing to the message that we want to create, which is that of empowerment, which is that of self-sustenance as Africans, most of us are in this room, but also as people of the global south who have been a part of this, end of global health. I think this.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Nui, I can see you're bobbing your head as Ysuf was talking about representation and stories. As a creative who sits on the the other side of the equation, who is the one taking photos, going into communities, and you obviously work with our partners at Unlimit Health, on FGS. How do you balance, showing something with dignity, but also having an artistic vision to it, and also ensuring that it meets the creative brief that you get? How do you balance both of those things?
I've been working with Unlimit Health for the last 4 years about projects in Ivory Coast mainly. And most of the stories that I have been capturing, especially in the western part of Ivory Coast, in a region called Soubré, has been created with the communities there. I had several trips, as Ysuf was giving as example. It also needs time to be immersed in the community, to understand what is the reality, and to build the story more with the people, a story that reflects the reality that's happening there. In the case of the region of Subre, when I've arrived there, I've understood that the space in which the woman was exposed to the female bilharzia, especially was around fields, rice fields. It's also a region with a lot of water, like rivers, lakes around, and it's a region where they are very much exposed to this disease. So I will just add that such stories cannot be created without working with the people, understanding the background, and also making it in a way that really honor who they are. One situation, for instance, that happened on my very first trip in the region was also, I remember this lady who told me that you people, you come here, you photograph us, but we don't actually see where it goes, and we don't always see the results of all this, you know, because when I come and I do this work, I explain them why we are doing this. So I think there's also this dimension of also bringing back the story to the people. That's also a part that is very much important, bringing back the story to them, and showing them that they are also portrayed with respect. And also, I think we need also more action for making those people understand the impact and the reason of why we do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of us that work in the NTD sphere, we reference the WHO NTD roadmap for a lot of our activities. And one of the pillars of the roadmap has always been country ownership. And we would often talk about how can we champion country ownership if the communities have a hard time owning the stories that we share about them. And I think the question to Luke would be, you know, as someone who's worked in the community and also with lived experience of NTDs, how do we get better at that? How can we get better at working with our communities?
Thank you. Getting to work better with these people at the community, because they are the people themselves who are suffering from the disease, and they should be the key players in this storytelling process. So I think the first thing we have to do is go right to the community, get the people there from the community, let them have time to share their stories themselves, and not just being the subjects. Let them share the story themselves, and let them take control of how to tell the stories themselves. Secondly, I think it's good to give them time to review the story, how it has been captured, how it will be presented, so that they are comfortable how they will be represented in the story, so that they will not feel offended at the end of the process. And then again, it is good to obtain informed consent from the people, because you can't just go to a place, take photos of people, take their stories without getting their consent. Because at the end of the day, you may find you have offended them in one way or another. So it is very good to have their consent. Let them consent. Whatever you do within their community, let them give consent. And then they should also be informed why the story is being collected and for what purpose, and where is it going to be shared, and where is it going to be used, and how. Again, it is good for the community to understand the information clearly. Let them also share the information in a way that it can be understood, both to the partners collecting the information and even to themselves. Let the information flow both ways, in a way that can be understood by both parties. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Margaret, I'm going to look at you now and sort of, you know, talk about what Luke has presented as well. In terms of involving communities and individual lived experiences, in your experience as a creative, as a journalist, what have been some areas that we've failed? What have been some pitfalls in how the public health storytelling portrays our communities, and how could we help those narratives, and how could we remake those narratives with community involvement?
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that probably we don't do very well is if you look at the imbalance between the person coming to tell the story and the community. So like Luke mentioned, we don't create that ownership from the get-go. So there's already an imbalance there. And you can actually tell that, the way that you want to portray the story is probably heavily favoring your side than the community, which already shows that, you're losing the agency that you should be creating from the get-go. So I think that's one of the elements. And then also, I think some of the sessions across the conference did speak about creating community champions, and I think that's an important element that oftentimes is missed out. So, when we go into communities, you don't just want to go and impose on the community. You don't want just to go and push the narrative that you have. You want to create ownership, but you also want to create champions that can actually understand the cultural nuances. They actually understand how the lived experiences of the community. So that will help you in terms of telling your story and bringing out those concrete narratives that you're looking for. So I think that's another element that we need to integrate within our storytelling. And then the other one as well is ensuring that you let the community understand and tell their lived experiences, but also become part of that process that you're doing. So like Luke mentioned, they need to understand why you're doing that storytelling aspect in the first place, and then also involve them as much as possible. It could be through the champions, it could be through the local leaders, it could be through the narrative that you're trying to create as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, agency, community ownership, establishing good rapport with our communities, and not sort of doing a snap and dash of the photos and the stories that we're collecting has been a sort of a theme. And I think back to the session that Ariel, you were hosting, and we're looking at how we can escape the neglect. And a huge part of that panel, if I got the drift right, was reshaping the narratives as well. And how the narratives, and we heard from our colleagues at Africa No Filter, how it can have several far-reaching ill effects. Nui, I'm going to come back to you. As a creative person who receives a content brief or a content gathering brief from NGOs, from donors, from partners, how do you sort of balance that it also meets the fundraising needs, but also doesn't restrict you as a creative professional? How do you balance both of those things? Because as you mentioned, it's going into the community establishing report, and oftentimes you do get pushback, as you've had it from your experience. How do you balance that?
It often happens that I can receive briefs that are very precise in terms of what image are expected. And sometimes those briefs doesn't reflect the way I would like, or that I find respectful portraying the people, the community. So in those situations, I always negotiate with the institution. I explain to them that this is not the way that I would like to portray this thing, and I propose them a different way that I find more respectful toward the people. I think there's this situation in which we have the different institution that has certain power, and there is also, the financial part of it that can sometimes make us tempted to just do things in a way that is not always respectful of the way we see things. But I think it's really important to propose a different narrative today, especially in a context where we know the power of image. on the people themselves and on the way they perceive themselves, but also on the way the rest of the world perceive them. I feel like today this generation of African creatives really carries this idea of reclaiming our identity. And that identity, I believe, is rooted in a certain pride that we are building again now. Growing up, we have seen in media a certain way of depicting us, which need to change, really. So I think it's also a responsibility of the creatives, of the African creatives, to impose a certain way of presenting their people, because it's also the way they present themselves to the world. I also believe in the power of image in the process of healing. I think image can heal, and I believe that image can also empower the people. I think there is no point into perpetuating certain image that keep people in a certain way of perceiving themselves, rather than making image that can empower them in a way that soon they can be more autonomous, they can be less dependent on on all this help, you know.
Thank you so much. And I think a huge part of that is also working with local creatives within the continent, who have the agency to share the stories the way that they want to share them. I'm literally going to come across a chair to Luke, and I talked first about how can we get better at working with our communities, but also how can we take this conversation forward? Like what will look like? How can we use an ethical storytelling lens when working with our communities and conversing with our communities from a community lens? How do we take this forward?
Thank you. The way we can do it is by, first of all, get people from within the community, the healthcare workers from the community. Let's get them, let's engage them so that they can be the drivers, they can be the gatekeepers as we move to the community to get the people who will share the stories. They will be the ones now who will build the confidence and trust of the community so that they can open up and share the stories without any fear. For example, myself, when I was sharing my story, it really gave a lot of impact in the activities which was being done during that time, because then the people from the community would identify themselves with me easier and would share their stories openly and freely without fearing anything, because they know me, they understand who I am, they know my life. And also, during our clinical trials, it gave us very simple time and very easy time to get even the clients to come and participate in the trials, because they knew that they have their own within the system, and they trust that they are safe within whatever is being done, because one of theirs was involved. So I think the best way is engaging one from the community. Then secondly, whatever we are sharing, whatever information we are sharing, let it be in a way that they understand. Let everything that is presented to them, either in questionnaire or whatever, be translated in a language they can understand themselves. So that as we go to the field, taking out the narratives, getting stories from them, the flyers we take there, the posters should be, we should have some translated in the local language so that the people can understand better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think a big part of what I would like to see happen across the sector is how can we get better at what you're just mentioning, what Nui and Luke we are both mentioning is, being very transparent with our communities and what we're doing with the stories and photos that we are collecting from them. Ysuf, as sort of someone, individuals we sit on the other side of the equation, don't we, as NGOs, we are the ones that are working with local creatives and communities. How do we balance, because there obviously is a power imbalance that happens when you work with this. How do we balance that?
Thank you, Subin. I think as Nui said, images can be healing, and as global health practitioners, we're in the business of care, and our work is to heal. And we have to ask ourselves, are the stories we tell about our work healing people? As people who consume those stories, are those stories healing us? And I think that's where we have to begin when we're creating a brief. And I think it's also important, I love history, and I like to think about images through a historical lens. And in the global South, photography and film came through colonization, right? Images were used as tools of subjugation. They categorized people, and they were used to define, to monitor behaviors, and were tools of surveillance. And they justified scientific racism and racial hierarchy, and especially for NTDs, they hold people down. When you're looking at these older images of people who are impacted by NTDs, it's, we're watching trauma. That's what it is. It's like people's most traumatic periods in their life displayed. And so I think for me, working at the End Fund, producing multimedia, it's important to not create the brief by telling the creative. I think there's so much power in collaborating, and as Nui said, there's so many talented artists, journalists, and storytellers on the continent who are thinking of innovative ways to tell those stories. And one thing that we did at the End Fund in the past few years is commission a number of African artists to tell the social, economic impact that NTDs have on communities. And we engaged 6 artists, and each came out with completely different stories. Some used photojournalism to tell the facts. Others used documentary to sit with people to understand the complexity of their lives, the depth of their emotions. And others used fine art, images that sell for thousands of dollars. But looking at issues of NTDs that are out of the cultural canon and saying, let's reframe this narrative and put it at the center. And through this project, in partnership with Ida Malune and a number of artists, we were able to take our cause, neglected tropical diseases, to the UN, to the Vogue magazine, their photo festival, to the Guardian, to the Africa Center in New York, to the streets of New York City, and so many other places. And I think it's important to not tell creatives what we expect of them. And I think, working with so many people who have science backgrounds, the idea generally is, okay, we want these deliverables. These are the programmatic impact highlights that we want documented, and we want it in these exact ways. But I think it's to take a step back and saying, we want to collaborate with you. We have this issue that we want to highlight, and this is the background information we have, and these are our recommendations of questions to ask. Please send us a proposal of what you think is the best way to approach the story. I think that's that. And then I think most importantly, it's also important to think about the sustainability of storytelling. As organizations, we are putting so much money into telling these stories, but what does the storytelling infrastructure look like for NTDs after our organizations leave? And we're seeing that happen now, right? Are creatives in those communities empowered to connect to those stories and tell those stories? And what type of resources are we making available now? If we're taking people who live, in Ethiopia, where I'm from, to places where people impacted by NTDs are, they're able to form connections, they're able to form strong relationships, and they can come back to those places and write a love story. And that love story might involve someone who is living with trachoma, or someone who once had parasitic worms. And so I think it's important to expose people who are telling these stories about our lives and our communities so that they can include the things that are impacting everyone in that society. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's really true. I think in terms of what the community has talked about today, and all of us have talked about today, but we can keep talking about this in silos, but the real impact has to happen at a policy level. Margaret, I'm going to come to you in terms of not just what has been spoken on today, but also in general, how can we use ethical storytelling to influence policies at national level, regional level, but also at grassroots level? Is because, as Ysuf was saying, it's not about making it an exception, but rather making it the norm. How can we do that?
Thank you very much. I think one of the things we can do is look at some of the narratives that we're trying to put out. So identifying the gaps, but also the successes of resilience and innovation. So we don't really have to focus on, the negativity of or what we are trying to propagate, but we might want to look at some of the successes and resilience and innovation that comes across from some of these communities. We can also look at highlighting local solutions to, in leadership and progress of these communities. So essentially, for example, recently we had a vaccine drive in DRC. We're managing the Mpox outbreak there. And some of the health workers that we work with were on the front line of this initiative. So that kind of creates that agency for the community, for them to understand and see that, we are leading the front line, but also we are giving them the opportunity for them to realize that, this is an important initiative for them, and we are also, being part of that process and part of that solution as well. The other thing I think is ensuring that we're shaping public perception, but also integrating the political will within our initiatives. So for example, using media narratives to influence how policymakers and the public perceive diseases. So this is one of the areas as well that we can use. For example, a compelling documentary that, like Ysuf was mentioning, or a photo series that can actually turn a neglected issue into a national or a continental priority. And I think one of the sessions I attended on the neglected tropical diseases, they were saying that you shouldn't use the word neglected, we should shift to priority. So I think also some of these terms that we use could also help in propagating some of these things that we're talking about. So when it comes to ethical storytelling and policy issues, I think it also starts with us as private sector, as public sector, as NGOs, what terms are we using, how are we going into communities and, propagating some of these things, and just giving, that kind of perspective. So it starts with us, but also trickles down as well to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can see Ariel smiling as we were mentioning the previous session. And again, thank you so much to you guys as well. I'm going to now open it up for a Q&A. Thank you so much to the panel who's been on here. We can take a couple of questions if there are any questions before we move on to the rest of the session. Are there any hands up? Can we please pass the mic to? If you could state your name and a question to the panelists, please. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Adam from Ethiopia, and actually I'm Africa CDC fellowship in Kofi Annan Global Public Health. And what has been discussed here in the panel is just the physical report or communication with the community. And what about scientific issues that have been published so far, which could maybe draw the positive or negative image of an institution, the publishers and citing of the article that we use in daily activities of the science and research when we publish or maybe when we apply for some call for a grant. And is it also considered in this way? And thank you.
Thank you. Ysuf, do you want to?
So maybe just to clarify, are you asking like what type of communication collateral do we use when writing for scientific like publications and for donor grants?
Yes, for both.
Oh, proposals?
For both, for example, when
Okay.
for call and for publication, some may just without citation, those can be draw a negative image on an institution as well as for on the science output of those activities, which could be whatever the science case, which can bring a policy change in the given community or in country. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
frantic proposals and
Yeah, I mean, I think, like in terms of, I work a lot with like visual media. So I think in thinking about visual media for science, it's important to have like, I think I was talking about like clinical like images. If we're thinking about like a proposal for LF, you know, or like leishmaniasis or even like trachoma, I think it's important to document what that issue is if the donor is not familiar. But at the same time, you know, I think we in the global health sphere speak to each other often, you know? So most people know what you're talking about. You know, a lot of people in this room know, you know, and I think it's speaking to an outside audience who's not familiar with that work, who won't know what that is. And I think those images are helpful in that case when you're stepping outside the room. But in terms of other like ways to tell like scientific stories, I think there's so many powerful like illustrators and so many other ways to document what these stories are. And it just depends on like the context for your purpose.
yeah, thank you so much. We have to cut the Q&A short. Thank you so much. But is there a question there? Can you please pass the mic? Yes.
Yeah, so thank you so much. My name is Dr. Ade. I work for Japaigo from Nigeria. Yeah, so thank you to the panelists, and the experience you shared was very nice. I just wanted to get a bit, I like the phrasing of your topic, the ethical of storytelling, which is very powerful. I also think that I want to hear your view. We've done so well in the era of taking pictures and getting consent. So what do you say to when you tell a story and you are misrepresenting the people, you know? So one of you said, oh, when you tell the story, it's good for you to share that story with the people before they sign off, right? In this era of litigations, right? So what do you say to creating a story for a community and getting their consent to sign off on that story before you actually publicize that story? I think that's the next phase we should move into so that we are holding ourselves accountable for what comes out of that story. So I want to hear your view. So thank you for your...
Thank you so much. And I think, Nui, you touched about this, didn't you? You were saying taking it back to the communities when you take the photos, because you do get questions like, what are you doing over here? What do you think about in terms of the question? Thank you.
For most of the projects I've been doing, we always go with agreements that are signed by the people. Before they sign, it's explained to them exactly what this image are going to be used for. So I think it's a practice that can be spread a little bit more, and yeah, that can also help create this trust relationship between us and us as creative and or image makers and the people that we portray. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really going to have to cut this short, but we're at booth 42 outside. All of our panelists will be with us for the next hour. If there's any questions, if you want to discuss this more, we'd love to talk to you more, understand your perspectives on this, because I think for me, for all of us, we're here to learn from a lot of you, and so we would love for you to interact. If I could have a huge round of applause for the panelists, please. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for joining us for this panel discussion. I hope it was interesting, and I hope it was thought-provoking as you go about your day, as you think about this, because it's not just one person's problem, it's all of us, and all of us have to come together to solve this. Now that we've heard from our communities, I would like to invite some key stakeholders in this discussion. First of all, it's my immense pleasure to invite Dr. Gilbert Bayenda, who chairs the NTD NGO network, and also Senior Trachoma Advisor at the Fred Hollows Foundation. Dr. Gilbert, how can NNN take ownership of the discussion? Over to you.
Thank you, Subin. Great job. Distinguished colleagues, friends, leaders, good morning. So my name is Dr. Gilbert Bayenda, like I said. My parents come from Tanzania. I am from Uganda. My wife is from Kenya. So you can imagine how many ethical stories we tell our children. They are very diverse. So it's an honor to be here on behalf of the Neglected Tropical Diseases NGO Network, which is a global alliance of NGOs united to fight neglected tropical diseases in line with the 2030 roadmap of the WHO. I would like to, of course, acknowledge my first chair, Ariel, members of the NNN. I have seen quite a number who are here. Thank you very much. It's good to see you take part in this session on ethical storytelling. Now, friends, the NNN does not just talk about change. We drive the change. As you can see, our Communications Working Group being part of the change, driving some of the stories that you have seen today or heard today, and those that you will hear in the future. Thank you very much, and we are most grateful that the working group is doing such a great job. So from the villages right here in Africa, for example, the ancestral lands in South America, to the stories of the Aborigines in Australia, and to the cities where many of us work, storytelling is a thread that weaves humanity together. It is how we make sense of our past, it is how we navigate our present, and it is how we reimagine our future. But here is the truth. The stories don't just describe the world, they shape the world. One of the panelists talked about a false narrative. They shape both the false and the positive narrative. They decide who gets seen and who remains invisible, who is cast as a hero and who is reduced to a victim. So for too long, these narratives around NTDs have been told about communities, not by them. They have been framed by outdated imagery and skewed power dynamics, and a language of pity that erases agency. My friends, this should end. Colleagues, this should end. So we are here to say that it is time to tell better stories and to tell stories better. But this isn't about ticking boxes and drafting policies, which are good, but it's a fundamental shift on how we see, how we listen, how we lift up those at the heart of this fight. So ethical storytelling is about centering the communities as co-creators, not just characters of someone else's script. It is interesting, I saw my brother from Turkana, I guess. Is he from Turkana? The brother that lived with leishmaniasis. For example, he understands cattle communities, and he understands nomadic health and nomadic pastoralism. If you look at the narrative being told about nomadic communities, it is totally skewed. If you have lived with the nomadic communities, like I have, for 7 years I was with the Karamojong, working on trachoma in Uganda, you begin to understand where you should start and where you should probably end. You look at an expert's story, and you know this person just Googled it or something. They've never lived this life. They do not appreciate the culture and the values of the community. So you cannot cause proper change when you do not appreciate or value the culture of the people you're working with. So also ethical storytelling means honoring lived experiences as expertise, because resilience isn't learned in a lab. It is forged in the fires of daily life. Again, in the nomadic communities, I would challenge any person who has tried to distribute medications during drought or famine. There are a lot of moving parts. You have to innovate. You have to understand what the community values and appreciates before you can initiate certain interventions. Otherwise, those interventions are bound to fail. So ethical storytelling is about catalyzing dignity, not just pity, because no one should be defined by their disease. You shouldn't think of a community and immediately think of just the disease. There are a lot of other things to consider. The good thing and the good news is that this ethical storytelling is not ending here. As the NNN, we do have our annual meeting on the 30th of September, just next door in Uganda at the Speaks Resort. I invite all of you to come and we continue this fight against NTDs through ethical storytelling. So today, let us make a deal, and not these deals where you ink something down. Let us just make a deal in terms of action. So as organizations, let us embed storytelling into our everyday reporting, policy making, and campaigns that we undertake. As individuals, let us listen before we speak. Let us amplify rather than appropriate. And let us recognize that true progress begins with humility. Now, as a global community, let us replace narratives of despair with stories of hope, with stories of equity and unshakable ownership. So the road to 2030 is steep, I know, in regard to eliminating NTDs, but I have never been more hopeful. Because when we equip communities to write their own stories, we don't just eliminate diseases, we ignite a movement. A movement where, for example, a child in Rwanda, or a grandmother in Guatemala, or a farmer in Papua New Guinea can look at their reflection and say, I am not just part of the footnotes, I am the author. So let us, so this is the future we are building, and that's the power of storytelling. And if we stand together and work together, united and unwavering, I am sure we will get there. Murakoze cyane. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bayanda. It is now my immense pleasure to invite Dr. Martin Muchangi from Amref, who is the Director of Population Health and Environmental Department, and as Amref has often asked, who owns the story.
Colleagues, good morning. Yeah, so thank you so much, Subin. Let me begin by thanking all those who have organized this. I'm not a storyteller, so I need to run a lot from, telling the story. But I want to begin by saying that for me, what I hear from you is that image is everything. And we create that image by the way we communicate. You can paint very nice things which are happening in a bad way, and people are going to take it that way. Or you can also use the opportunity of communication to paint the bad things which are happening in a way that we can take positive actions. So the onus is on us to really decide which way we want to take. I want to speak about the technical people who actually spoke very well here. You have the opportunity to change the narrative. But the other day I was listening to some technical conversations on the priority tropical diseases, not the neglected tropical diseases. And it was very clear that we used very, very hard jargons. And that complicates the understanding of what we are even trying to say. So from the technical side, I think it is the highest time we start appreciating that simplifying things is necessary for everyone to understand and to onboard. Then the other thing is that as we move forward to engage, we need to analyze our stakeholders very well. We need to analyze the political economy, and we need to utilize the potential levers to make sure that whatever we are putting out there is within the premise of appreciable communication premise. Now, I'll just challenge you to do 3 things, okay? We can always keep on communicating within ourselves. I don't think we have been so powerful enough to make the world start changing. When I was listening to this, I was saying, like, this could even fit to be a plenary session where everyone listens to, all of us here. But of course, we will make it happen in the near future. So the challenge here is, how do we scale up this kind of novel thinking that places priority tropical diseases? I need to try and, put it in my mind at the center of the global health conversations. That is the first thing that we need to do. Then the second thing, we are assuming so much that communication must happen from us. How do we empower communities to speak for themselves? Because they also need to speak for themselves so that even as we are telling the story from the technical side, let us have synergies from the communities also. So those are the two things which I want to leave behind, but I'm really looking forward to making this a momentum. And I'm so happy that NNN is doing its work. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Thank you so much, Supin. Let's join hands and make this happen. Thank you so much.
Miria, you should probably copyright the phrase, neglect prior disease for elimination. But thank you so much, Dr. Martin. It was really great to hear from you. I'm now going to invite Communications Manager from DNDi, Mercy Mumo, to talk about the things that DNDi has done and their efforts towards this. Thank you so much.
Can you even see me? I'm like the height of the podium. All right. We've had some very rich discussions on what ethical storytelling means. And for us at DNDi, we've made it a deliberate effort to be challenged on how we tell human interest stories, but also be respectful on how we tell those stories. And it's morphed over the years. So just having a front row seat where the story is being told has given us a great privilege, but also it's given us a time to reflect in how we tell these stories. For me as a gatekeeper, and also as an organization, the value we stand for, and the things that we want to communicate. So sometimes we often get lost in the excitement of wanting to tell narratives that we feel fit us, that, they try to drive our personal agendas, but this is a call to action that we actually get to feel the story, put ourselves in the shoes of the subjects at hand so that we portray them how we would like us to be portrayed, and that has been said very well by the speakers. It's time, of course, we shifted the way we tell stories and move from the suffering victim narrative that we've always told to a more beautiful and impactful stories of change, hope, and resilience. My call to action to you this morning is let's collaborate. Be it in proposal writing on storytelling, because it's one thing for me to put together a budget to tell a story, but it's another thing for us to come together as partners and put together a good, sufficient budget that will tell stories that will live or outlive the test of time. It's time that we started telling stories that unlock a new level of formally integrating storytelling into the school curriculum, and not only for NTDs, even the One Health approach. So this is what impactful partnerships are all about. So let's just get on board and do this together so that we can have a beautiful outcome for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're sort of coming to the end of the ownership session discussion, but it is my immense pleasure to invite Victoria Miguda, who is the Associate Vice President of Global Communications at the N Fund. Victoria, thank you for your support. Thank you for nudging us in the right direction. I'll now leave the stage to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Subin. Thank you, everyone. I think this has been a really, really intellectual, stimulating session that should have a longer time frame, because this time frame is like really, really short to be talking about ethical storytelling. I kind of was writing notes on my phone as the speakers were speaking, and I think what we've come out from here, I had a little bit of snippets and information that probably we need to reiterate on. I think that one of the things that reflections that I thought about was we need to really commit to ethical storytelling. It should not just be a session that we come to talk about, and then once we leave the door, it's It's just another panel discussion. We really need to commit to that. We need to think about centering lived experiences at the end of the day. We often say that, we center these voices, but do we truly listen to the people with lived experiences? Does it mean that we need to shift from storytelling about people or storytelling with people? That is one of the key pointers that I came out with. We need to start telling stories with people. It requires us definitely to integrate those lived experiences onto how we build, research, and disseminate these stories. I think at this point, it's very clear that the era of deficit-driven storytelling must end. Too often, our stories focus on brokenness, dependency, and helplessness, rather than dignity and choice. So we need to really think around that. We need to challenge ourselves to reframe our narratives, and people affected by priority diseases for elimination. We are changing, again, the name, hopefully. I hope it catches on, and Mireille, we can copyright that. Thank you for that. They are leaders. These people are caregivers. They are innovators. They are change makers. And their stories must be told in ways that reflect their strength, resilience, and self-agency. We have to also put the rights holders on the driver's seat. Many a time, sometimes we let go of the notion that we are the sole narrators. We need to let go of that. And we need these rights holders to be the one to own their own narratives, determine how their stories are told, and what is emphasized, other than what we think should be emphasized. Our role should be to facilitate as storytellers. We should be there to facilitate, not dictate, at the end of the day. Many a time, sometimes, or even in the recent past, we've gotten feedback and say, how can you highlight this person's story? It doesn't portray them in the right way, but this person specifically, the subject specifically said, I want to tell my story in this manner. I want to be portrayed in this manner. But we have often at time directed narratives as to how perception can be taken, from people, audiences, other than the subject themselves. I had many more notes. I'm trying to literally filter through them, and my phone is not giving me the time. So apart from that, we need to also tackle bias. From the beginning of this session, there's some videos that were shown from Africa No Filter. I know most of you had not reached the room, but those were really, really powerful, where there was bias, especially on narratives that are being propagated across race, gender, power, and it really does shift the power dynamics. And so we need to continue upholding unequal power dynamics. If our storytelling, continues upholding power dynamics, it is not ethical storytelling. It becomes a tool of oppression instead. So without further ado, I know that I was supposed to do other closing remarks, but everything has been said. I also want to introduce us to the last session. I don't know if Subin, if you'll allow me. We will be showcasing a film that was produced by one of our own, Ysuf, who was on the panel, called Fly Collectors. And it's a film that just puts together, not only, I know someone asked a question about the science, how do we communicate that? So it's puts together the science and as well as the subject, the community, at the center of the storytelling opportunity. So without further ado, I think, Subin, if you'll allow me, we can go straight to the film. Thank you.
Après revue des données épidémiologiques, entomologiques et cartographiques, nous avons l'agréable plaisir, Monsieur le ministre, de vous informer que la transmission de cette maladie est éliminée du Niger. Je n'oublierai pas l'infatigable membre comité de l'élimination de l'onchocercose. J'ai cité ici le professeur Daniel, qui est toujours à nos côtés pour nous appuyer, pour nous accompagner.
I started working on river blindness around 1976 as an intern in Ghana. After graduating, I joined the Onco Control Program in West Africa. And we used to do river prospections using helicopters. And these were used for spraying insecticides. And here, behind my microscope, are the cytotaxonomies for the Onco Control Program. And here you can see the OCP vehicles lined up, getting ready to go to the field. For almost 50 years, I've been working on this same project. It is quite gratifying to see that one can get to a situation where countries are now going to eliminate onchocerciasis.
Le programme ministère santé o wone mun félicité quoi déjà yi mo jakka hen goto fo excellent donc yi on est collé o jaggi goto kesso effectivement o kadi ko semelim quoi donc o winday mbo e o do donc mi kadi aussi c'est bon il y a la qualité rempli point o arina en 2017 o arin do mais adi do bade choix de sito donc kanko mo ar semaine garowo salla a jaɓi mardi ou mercredi so ari kadi o walton o golle ko expert international ko expert OMS on ko cercose professeur Daniel Bouaki o ar so ari après o yewtude on o waɗi mon expliquer Sénégal holko woni fandare mabɓe oto tolni élimination mais wallito laltol so nani mo lamde o jarama kadi ko kolle ɗe hay voilà bon on va aller il va vous motiver un peu.
Onchocerciasis is transmitted by the black fly Simulium damnosum. Blindness results from invasion of the eyes by skin-inhabiting embryos of the roundworm Onchocerca volvulus. Breeding occurs in many narrow streams. The larvae appear as black patches on rocks, leaves, and twigs.
But these are very newly hatched larvae
it will take about 5-6 days for them to get to be a pupae. They are very tiny ones. Yamusa is one of the communities that we say is at high risk of fungal. And so a community like Yamusa, you can assess to show that your medicine is working. The fly breeds in these river valleys. They come out and they bite people. If you have somebody who is infected and they are bitten by the fly can pick up this infection. And so if you check the fly, it's critical when you want to prove that transmission has stopped. The fly collectors are your call to show that you are achieving results. We cannot be free of all diseases, but there are some neglected tropical diseases. They can be prevented.
Ada rekaman nggak? Kalau anak ono.
Abu Jaki Cerno. Abu orang Cerno.
boo gisee loolu puisque xam naa ci dëkk bii la dëkk te dama di jël volontairement fàttaliku liggéey boobu dañ ma newoon daa am feebar bu ñëw loolooy tax simili yi ñoo indi feebar bi
ko en 88 ɓe ari ha ka jowuro ari on wattu ko baba woni jowuro ɓe yewdi e makko ɓe yo noddu population o ɓe jooɗoɗa ɓe suɓanamo yimɓe nayo jeeyaɓe ka saare ɗo ɓe wawa formude ɓe
lañ ne 7 heures ba 13 heures nga wàcc nga ñëwaate 14 heures ba 18 heures loolu yombul ay décision ferme ngay war a jël ci liggéey boobu et en même temps volontairement la
mais ngala cuude ha ƴakka si ari tu a keppaymo ɗo itta ferma watta on noon ka jiifama waɗɗatta goɗɗo kadi habboɗa si ndi ari berko ari o berko ari hara ngi yarali ƴiƴam maɗa par ce que so ngi ƴakki ceñaw o ala yiide ɗa ceno ha ngi ƴakkuma wakkiɗo on attuɗa ngi nanggude haray ngi wata accide goɗɗum ka ɓandu ma
eyi yo fayda miijo heewata e mum ɓayde haray jomum kay miijo kay si iwi ɗo haray jo peut être ko si yeeyi programme ji mum kono haray ɗo alhamdulillah
ga kay simin ari ga haray meɗe woni ga no waɗani mi wuula no deeƴi meɗe miiƴi kadi fi famille on ko galle par ce que sa yimmi hedde 7 heures bimmi ari ɗo ha 18 heures a hotata ko galle iɗa ga ay téléphone a huɓɓata pour wiyaɗa ɗuman fayda si probléme heeɓi ka galle toon an a andata sana ɓe itti goɗɗo ɓe délégué ari ha tawma ga haalanma a wawata ande kon ɗum feƴƴi ka galle ma
miɗo andi miɗo acci ɗo ɗo mi iwde to wode ko mi acci toon ɗo komi miije ɗo ko simi ari ko honno mi heɓirta ɓare simi ari comme no hendu ndu woni waɗirde ni muko jiɗi no metti heɓude
ɓay meɗe wulɗa kay ɓayde ɓe inni a fota heɗade radio ga a huɓɓata ga yiite a fimata ga cigarette a fota wonde kadi ka yimɓe ɗuuɗi par ce que bruit si yimɓeɓe ɗuuɗi no wawi kadi ɗi salon jippade no woodi par ce que allah wiyen ka qur'ana ko kullu muslimin ikwatun fa asinu bayna akawaykum anangue jele Soulay ay ande no mbayre hen ɗo ɗuuɗi allo on hay bus
mo ɓe hotuka place mum kadi wayi
At the beginning of the program, there were places where at least 20% of all adults, especially males, were visually impaired. Now you go to communities, and in places they say, "Oh, do you have is uncle still there?" Which means people are completely forgotten. The children will now have the opportunity to go to school without fear of the future being blind or losing their eyesight. This old man that we went to see is most likely one of the last people who have had this worst form of the disease.
Ani sita inel bekahuli kulu gojongo to konko tingom bonte bole sana mbe nyalo chori halo ko mama kama temandi pele isa ko nim kurumbitale nata jebe la piso ne dula ke ka korosinga bebe kurari asetonya anga soto wolu na ame o hasen se ta me to mo me ni putimi mo ni ndo be bori mo har bola hinkin tel be keri ne bas ni se ibeni la kile no akun jimin ba ate jiminna o halanga fisa.
The good news is that now in Senegal, the disease that is called river blindness, the disease is almost completely eliminated. We are happy because now the children are not going to have the same problem with the eyes. When we talk of the disease, we know that he is one of the people who was able to help us understand the disease.
Merci ngana nakali tayo ni sige. Wow. Ikam na ta bom janna. Ini sige dia ta nyala mun be si maya la ka haji weli fili.
Seeing the man as something that reminds us of how it was. When I was an intern, and we go to villages where you have the disease, you have a lot of the adults being blind. It's sometimes even emotional because sitting down with these people, and it's not a feeling that one will want to have. Where, like, it's, I don't know how to describe it, but it's something touching. And so wanting to be part of a group that controlled this situation was one of the motivating factors that got me interested in it. When I got involved in river blindness work, there wasn't a medication that could be used on a large scale. The main strategy was to kill the black fly. But if you're going to kill the fly, you'll still have the parasite that causes the disease in the people. And the adult of that worm can stay for between 12 and 15 years. So the strategy is you kill the flies for as long as the lifespan of the worm. Then by the time you stop your insecticide treatment, there won't be any worms left. In 1987, then the medication Mectizan was introduced for human use. The drug is produced by the company Merck and Co. Incorporated, and they decided to give the drug for as much as needed and for as long as needed. That was unprecedented in the sense for a pharmaceutical company to want to give a drug as a donation. for millions and millions of people. At the moment that the community members were given the opportunity to distribute the drugs themselves, the treatment numbers just skyrocketed.
Bonjour tout le monde. Ce n'est pas une campagne qui est à bafouer. Nous devons s'y mettre pour au moins bien dérouler notre campagne. Il est là ici. Par la voie orale. Le nombre de comprimés à donner dépend de la taille. Ça c'est de façon très claire. Hein? Plus de 160, la personne aura 4 comprimés. C'est de façon résumée, un site de distribution. Et maintenant, dire à la communauté, nous serons là à telle date. Pour que les personnes s'y rendent pour au moins en bénéficier les médicaments. Comme on est entre nous ici, on va dire la stratégie que nous allons adopter. Vous avez plus d'expérience dans ça, quoi.
Campagne comme porte à porte. Comme c'est fait, porte à porte. Pour si tu il faut que bénéfice.
Gollo ben e wombe arde be. Golle den kadi bisi ko don kadi burata wadde sir.
Wawata jonude résultat mo faala den on. Se wi yo be ar wobbe ben arata. Dum kadi ko dum beydayno ni ton.
Waɗen campagne déroulé mo normal heɓen attendre ko landaɗen kon parce que koye dañi koye fin wonde
Ben, nous, on va adopter la stratégie porte à porte, hein, ainsi que votre déplacement surtout, c'est pas évident de faire déplacer une équipe, c'est de clôturer cette orientation.
Ok. Merci.
Souley, est-ce que dans l'année que nous sommes entourés? Hein?
Dia udah masuknya mama ho borong motor dong.
Fakir ma ya go kafel.
Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Wasfat al-baraka.
Ni Alman. Kakak mau mengat menen no dion. Fi no wadi campagne ji wondo arde debal araje don. Haalindirane yewtide e makko toro dem. Pour no yarira ko nafoore men wala yiya woɓɓe koyngal ngal no ɓuuti no wayi koyngal e koyni tawa koyngal ngal no ɗumanni no tiwri ko ɗum woni ñabbu woni mandeji mum ay si ɗum ala ene wiyen ɓuuri kadi ɗum kadi no wona ɓuut tawa ɓe wiya no jippi tun e tagare
hanen ko won ɗum si tawi siko jam la joni mbay no conscient no ɗo almami no ɗo o wita juuro koye haalda jongalleji ɗi e jongalleji ɗi haalnaɓe te
enen ni ko nakke ñama ka ɓawa goɗo joni
pour mais fuɗɗo jonirde hannde eyi wayde tawi ɓe haali waɗi no yiɗɗe balɗe ɗo fof hiɗen ɗo hiɗen jinduɗude par ce que en fuɗɗi ko jonirde hannde ɓe yii no wonna hendoreede après noon si ɓe kamɓe ɓe wawa ruttade ka poste men iwri ni normalement wayde o nganndi kaka chef de village o ngattorte
ɗon kaka tawi mum haa ɗo ko ɗon jogii nombre ɗum ko yara eyi ɗon ko ɗum noon ɓeɗara kon
Adana, leyata. Sebe.
yara nayi nan
Le mano don. Okay.
e secondaire on wutta ko hôpital noon eyi ani ɗen ndenen ko ɓuri heede kon fayda ko maña
joni sabude koye ngol ɗo ɓe hata jonde lekkele ɗe ok haray joni kon ɗum men sikkemu a joni haray ɗo par toujours
Allah waɗi jokkama ha tawama fewn ɗo ngu iwi ha hande kadi minen ko woni e miijo amen ko meɗen waɗi volonté kam men wanno meɗen eɓɓi dandude yimɓe amen jeeyaɓe ka commune amen ɓe kala nde wiyango feeñi nokku goɗɗo minen meɗen ɗo pour haɓagol ɗum eyyi
I'm chef de groupe Salim Touré.
This is Suleiman Sanya.
Ahmed Lamin Ba.
And this is Mamadou Lamin Ba.
Satene Ba.
And Satene Ba.
Okay, thank you. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the work that you have been doing. I myself, I have been collecting like this for a very long time, for almost 40 years. Sometimes you might think the work you're doing is not very important, but it is very important. It is the work that will tell whether Senegal has eliminated transmission, and the best way to show that the disease is gone away is to look at the fly. Next year, there won't be any treatment. But your work will continue because we need to know that the disease is not coming back. The children tell us how it is now, but we have to take the civilians seriously so that we don't revert to how it was. I think the ultimate goal for anybody working in the health sector is people free of diseases that are preventable. And that concept of health for all, that is what I will wish to see in all these communities so that they can achieve their utmost potentials.
Thank you so much for joining us. We apologize, we extended a bit of a time. Thank you to our panelists, wonderful for being here. Thank you to our audience. Special thanks to my friend and colleague Anna Georgeson from Unlimit Health, who has helped co-create this with me. We wouldn't be here without you dragging us along. As I leave, I want to leave you with one last thing. As we stand on the precipice of cuts, of funding crisis across the sector, I often can't help but wonder why is it that the charity sector gets the first boot, even though the people in this room are doing some amazing work. It may be a very, very minuscule part of that is how we talk about impact, how we talk about our shared stories. So let's try and change our narratives, and as our colleagues at Africa No Filter tell us, let's tell better stories, and let's tell stories better. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. could usher out the room so the next session can start, that would be great. Thank you so much.